Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Keeping the Human in Hiring, How to Drive Connection in Recruitment and Onboarding. My name is Kira Pintel and I'm Head of Employer Brand Advisory for AMS. Before we get started, we'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you can get the most out of today's session. So you'll have the opportunity to submit your text questions by typing in the question pane in the control panel. Please feel free to submit these at any time. We'll collect them and address them in the Q&A session at the end. If we do not have a chance to get through all of your questions, then don't worry, we will respond to these after the webinar. And if you'd like a copy of the slides, please let us know and we'll be happy to share them, details to follow at the end. So without further delay, let me introduce today's panel. I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Jones, who is Global Director of Customer Success at Onboarding. Welcome, Chris. And Ben Eubanks, who is Chief Research Officer at the Lighthouse Research and Advisory team. And of course, you've got myself. So we thought we'd start by doing a little introduction to each of our organisations. So at AMS, we do two things, and I'd like to say that we do them incredibly well. So we provide talent acquisition solutions and talent advisory services. We support around 200 clients in more than 120 countries around the world. And for our enterprise clients alone, we hire more than 250,000 experienced staff every year. And in addition, we hire 25,000 early careers hires and around 15,000 contingent worker placements. At AMS Advisory, we're a global consulting business which has delivered talent acquisition transformations for some of the world's most recognisable brands. We draw on more than 20 years in the talent industry with 450 consultants delivering adaptable world-class solutions, drawing on the expertise of our wider AMS colleagues, which is around 8,000 strong. We blend powerful insights with great people, measurable innovation and operational rigour to deliver impactful business outcomes across strategy, technology, D&I and employer brand. Chris, could you introduce Onboarder for us?
Yeah, thanks, Kira. Hi, everyone. So Onboarder is a workflow communications platform that helps both automate people processes by integrating with core HR systems, but also really focusing on driving genuine human connections in an organization. And it does this by trying to orchestrate and coach different people in the journey. So from an onboarding perspective, a manager, a new hire, a buddy, for example. So Onboarder was founded in 2015 in Sydney, Australia. And now we have offices in Sydney, London, Austin, and New Delhi. And we've got about 500 customers at the moment globally.
Thanks, Chris. Ben, over to you.
All right. Hey, everybody. So glad to be here with you and looking forward to a fun session today. So Lighthouse is an analyst firm in the HR tech space. So we cover the HR technology market, who's out there, what they do. We talk to over 200 different vendors a year in that space, companies like Onboarder and others. We also cover the services side. So we talk to companies like AMS and others to figure out what they're doing and how they're serving employers like all of you. And we take our research that we produce and try to distill it down to actionable and practical insights that you can use to make a better decision tomorrow you did yesterday. And today we'll share some of that data with you as we go through trying to help you level up and create more connection and humanity in the work you're doing.
So much. So we're going to kick things off with a quick poll. The question is, how would you rate your current candidate experience? Could do better, we're doing okay, and we're smashing it. It should be appearing on your screen shortly. Some confidence smashing it, which is great.
As the researcher in the room, I love like the live research like happening right in front of me. That's always fun to see.
Exactly. It's vibing off the live research.
I think we can draw off the 5 experts who are smashing it as well and see what they're doing, you know.
Yeah, we wanna hear from you guys. Definitely what you're doing. Brilliant. We're up 57% voted, and it's great to see that. So we have around 41% could do better, 46% we're doing okay, and the 14% smashing it. And as Chris said, we definitely want to hear from you guys as to what you're doing and why you're smashing it. So let's jump in and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. So why is human connection more critical than ever? I think we all recognise that we can't open our email or news apps without seeing something today about AI and automation. There is a huge push for integrating AI into everything that we do, but we need to remember that we are all human. And human connection has always been a basic human need that employees crave at work. But in a hybrid world of work and AI, it's becoming a really powerful competitive advantage. And I'm going to hand over to Ben and Chris, who's going to dig into this a little bit further for us.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do every year is we survey candidates on their experience in the hiring process. What do you feel about this? What are your priorities? What are your expectations, your annoyances, all those kind of things? And one of the things that stood out this year, we had a TA leader ask us, hey, does that relationship with the recruiter, does that persist? Does that carry on past someone's hire date? And so when we looked at the actual data, we asked candidates that question. What we found is for the majority of candidates, they stay connected to that person for a year or even longer. And so that's a good reminder for me, because when I was recruiting years ago in the trenches, getting these things done, one of the things that I found myself was that person that I helped to bring in, I was often sort of a trusted resource. I was outside their reporting chain and stayed, connected to them for a longer period of time over the years. Even when they were moving on to other roles in the business, it was still like a come back and let me know how you're doing, because that connection was so powerful. And as Kira said, in this world where AI is in every headline, every conversation, it feels like it's a reminder of the power that we have to really connect with people and the value that carries for them long term. We may feel like it's transactional, but for the candidate at the other end that's coming in, we'll hear more from that from Chris in a little while on the onboarding side. But as you're bringing them in, that relationship really does matter and sticks around. All right, next up. Sorry, I'm used to controlling the slides. Kira's over there. I got the commands. I got to actually let her know to move it. So a quick story that just illustrates this for me really well. So there's a great book called Giftology. If you're in the TA world, it's just a good resource for how to connect with people, and talks about how to use gifts and connections with that other person. And the author, John Ruhlin, tells the story of when he proposed to his girlfriend. Okay, so I don't know about any of you who had one of the storybook beautiful experiences. Mine was kind of low key, but he is a gift giver, and he wanted to do something big and amazing. So back when The Notebook was a popular movie, John decides he's going to write this notebook, fill it up with all these stories of their times together, which is a good idea. But then it goes off the rails. He decides to get a makeup artist who's a friend, doctor him up to look like he's older. And he's going to buy the seat next to his girlfriend on a flight, sneak the notebook to her, and then just pop the question after she's already reading this. Like, very, very convoluted experience. And all is going according to plan until he gets to the airport. He's going through security and he passes out from low blood sugar. And security does not like it. Heads up, if you doctor yourself to look like somebody else. And so he wakes up in the holding room in handcuffs, and it's a wild roller coaster experience. But ultimately, when he comes back around, gets out of trouble, she says, "You should have just asked me." And the takeaway from that, the takeaway for all of us when it comes to the candidates we're serving or the new hires we're trying to connect connection with, is we can't just give the thing we want to give. We have to give the thing that they want to receive. If we're just saying, well, it's this way for everybody, then we're missing a chance to really see and understand the unique pieces that make certain people tick, that make them excited about the work that your company does, that connect to your brand and your vision, all those sorts of things. All right, Kira, you move along. All right, and just a last thing here. When I was recruiting years ago, whether it was a Black Hawk instructor pilot for a helicopter pilots, whether it was accountants, regardless of what the role was, I quickly learned that the way to get to a yes wasn't through just offering more money. It wasn't through offering, some amazing benefit. It was finding a point of connection with that person, a way to get something from them and give something back to them. And that's what really stands out to me all these years later as the key ingredient. Again, especially in a world with more automation in it, that human touch is the differentiator between your company and somebody else.
And I think to your point there, Ben, that obviously during that recruitment process, they're craving it. And maybe unsurprisingly, during the onboarding process, they're also craving it. And we've recently at Onboarding published a report, our 2024 State of Employee Onboarding Report. And we found some really interesting insights. So this report, we'd surveyed 1,000 employees, and that was looking at the US, the UK, and Australia. And what we found here was connections with employees and connections with the managers were the top moments that make those new joiners feel valued and they actually feel excited to be in the role as well. And it was interesting looking at the findings around the difference in the onboarding experience when people said they had a wow moment. And we looked at what that meant, what a wow moment was. And what we identified, it was an experience that made them feel valued as a person and excited to be in the role. And so this just really highlights again that importance of connection and personalization in that process. We also, on the next slide, we're looking at the connection between a positive onboarding experience and some of those really critical business metrics that every organization is tracking and measuring against. So looking at employee engagement, looking at employee satisfaction, how motivated they were, and also looking at the productivity of those new joiners as they enter the organization. And all of these key factors were significantly positively impacted by having that connection and having a way to feel more connected to the manager, to other colleagues, and to the organization. And we've got a QR code for anyone who wants to get more familiar with this report. There's a lot of extra nuggets of wisdom in there. We'll talk through more of those today, but feel free if you'd like to scan the screen there to get the full report. When we then looked further, the research revealed that facilitating friendships during the onboarding process is not just a nice to have. Some organizations aren't really big on friends at work, but what we saw is it's very much a game changer and it enhances employee satisfaction, but also the integration into the organization, which then helps with those factors we were just talking about. And so what we found is that making friends in the organization, particularly during onboarding, can turn the experience around. So we saw some stats here. People who made friends at work were 4 times more likely to say they had an over-the-moon experience as we looked at it in the report. And they're also 2 times more likely to say that they had a positive experience. So it really does show that having that connection and what we previously might have said about you can't have friends at work is really not true moving forward, because we can see direct correlation and impact with the experience and the output as well. And then looking just at some extra steps around on the next slide, thinking about what the onboarding experience looks like for most employees. The picture doesn't look too rosy. What we saw in this report and the research was most organizations are still very much focused on compliance, and that's onboarding for them. Get the document signed, be compliant. And for 31% of new hires, the onboarding experience is just 1 day. It doesn't last any longer than that. It's in the door, sign the paperwork, and you're onboarded. And the interesting thing, a similar percentage of those respondents said that they've actually had a really poor overall onboarding experience. And so it's interesting to think about, if you're just focusing on the process and compliance, which is important, what are you actually missing out on in terms of the experience, but then also those factors that we mentioned before. And then on the next slide, we looked at the difference between hybrid and remote workers. And not to be the bearer of bad news, but that was even worse in terms of the findings of what we saw. And we know it is so much more difficult to engage a hybrid and remote worker, so maybe it's not surprising. But what we saw was almost half of remote hires have had a poor onboarding experience. And when we sliced the data, we saw that remote workers are twice as likely to say that the onboarding app or system that they used was not helpful. And 50% more said that the company culture was demonstrated poorly, or they didn't experience it at all, which is quite terrifying when we think about how much time and effort goes into building employer brand and employee experience as well. And I know, Ben, you've got some other insights on this topic too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, oh goodness, the stats you're sharing, Chris, like really speak to me, because when we were onboarding new people, that was the first thing that I realized is the process was documents, sign-offs, checklists. That was the entirety of our onboarding experience for a lot of our employees. And I was like, there's not a person that walks out of here feeling better about the company when they're done with this. How do we make them feel better about the job? Like you said, that like wow moment. How do we create that moment for people that they're like, this cements and solidifies the idea that I'm in the right job for me. I'm in the right place. I made the right choice. And this whatever's ahead is a good place to be. So we see in our research similar things to what y'all found at Onboarding, that the majority of employers say we are compliant, but not really personalized, not really engaging. We're just, making sure we don't get in trouble as a company. And you have to do that. We're not saying you don't, but if that's the extent of it, you're missing a chance to really build that connection to people and to help them. One of the ways I've been putting it lately is onboarding can either be a stumbling block or a springboard. Do you want it to just trip them up and slow them down and reduce their excitement about joining, or do you want it to be this point where they can't wait for what's next because of how you're setting up this picture of the future and how they see themselves in it? As the hurricane is bearing down on the U.S. today, one of the things I'm thinking back on is a friend of mine worked for a company a couple of years ago. I'm based in Huntsville, Alabama, and the company that she was the HR leader for, their founder had built this prototype device back during Hurricane Katrina many years ago. He had built this prototype communications device, and when the hurricane hit, he took that in the back of his car down there, popped up this mobile communication satellite, and started using that to help the Red Cross coordinate relief efforts. Well, every new hire that started that company, that was part of the story they heard when they came in on day one. They heard the history, the legacy, the impact, and they could see themselves making that same impact and influencing that future direction of the company. And they helped connect those dots and didn't leave it to chance that they knew all of that story. So as you were sharing, Chris, that's so important to be connecting them in, to make them part of the culture, make them part of the bigger story, to make them feel connected, as we've shared here. And Kira, I'm going to pass it back over to you so you can start talking about some of that in the TA process and how those things fit together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, guys, for setting the scene there. So we know what the research is telling us, but let's jump into some of the practicalities of how you keep the human in hiring. And we're going to start with recruitment. So at AMS, we obviously recruit a huge volume of candidates, as you heard earlier. And through that, we've conducted our own research to understand really what candidates do want and what they don't want when applying to an opportunity. So I think it's important to call out that the candidates really want to feel supported and really understand where they are in the process at all times through clear communication. And this can be a combination of both automated communication and human communication. But through that communication, they want to learn more about the company and they want to learn more about the culture and feel like they're gaining more knowledge as they move through that process. So it speaks to everything that Ben and Chris have just spoken about here. On the other hand, what makes for a bad candidate experience is a lack of or an inconsistency in those updates. Ghosting or no feedback is an absolute no-no. Slow turnaround, so they're waiting, they're not sure what's happening next, or being unclear about the process in any way or where they stand is really what makes for that bad candidate experience. So when we're designing candidate experiences, when we're thinking about what those best-in-class experiences might be, we refer to what we call the 3 S's: straightforward, structured, supported. And leaning back to that research, you can see that we're making sure that we're ticking each of those boxes as to what makes a great candidate experience within those 3 S's. So it's really our kind of, it's our guiding principles for when we're designing. But overlaying all of this, I think it's really important that candidates are looking for a friendly contact, someone who can support them through the process. And the role of the recruiter in all candidate experience design is absolutely essential. And as you can see on the screen, we've got a very friendly recruiter in this process that we're designing. But I think it's important to say that while the 3 S's are the fundamentals, designing a great candidate experience really needs to be nuanced, and the individual motivations of the different talent types need to be considered. So, for example, when a candidate is applying for a customer service role, they may be looking and be motivated by very different things to someone who is applying for a head office role, for example. And equally, candidates who are applying for a temp or contract role may be looking for and be motivated by very different things than a permanent role. So to help us understand and tailor our approaches for different audiences, we can create what's called audience personas. Now, audience personas used to be a very, very time-intensive manual process to create these kind of personas. Actually, we have an AI tool that is supporting us to do this today, which is pulling out all the insights based on these audiences that we know, based on all the data that we have, and it's helping us to really shape the individual profiles of these different talent groups. Essentially what it is, it's a semi-fictional representation of your ideal candidate, and it's based on market research, it's based on real employee data, and it's also based on our own insights about the kind of traits and characteristics common against successful candidates. So it really encapsulates things about the key demographics, the attributes, importantly, the motivations, their expectations and their preferences, so that we can really understand what's going to be essential in designing their experience for them. They're really, really essential to us in recruitment because they give us clues about how to tailor the experience and essentially those communications. So, but both the recruiter and also importantly, the hiring manager really understand what kind of candidate that they're looking for and how they're going to be best motivated to join the business. So I wanted to share an example candidate journey with you, and this is for a customer service representative. So you can see that in this journey, there's 3 stages. The first is the attract, and this is where the employer is really hoping to grab the attention of the candidate and encourage them to find out more. And then in the engage phase, you can see that the candidate has been convinced to apply for a role. And then in convert, we really want to make sure that the candidate that has been successful is really excited to join. And obviously this is where Chris is our expert on the onboarding phase, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. As you can see, there are multiple touch points at every stage during this process, and every one of these provides an opportunity to deliver a really great candidate experience, but also really importantly to promote human connection and to promote the company and the company culture. A lot of the touch points in this process that you can see are absolutely enabled by technology, but it's really important, going back to the design principles, that you always have that human touch, and in this case the recruiter on hand, who can really support the candidate throughout that process, including any reasonable adjustments that may need to be catered for. One size will not fit all, and when we're thinking about inclusive processes, we need to make sure that there's always an opportunity for the candidate to request information in a different way, a slight adaptation to the process in order to really meet their needs. Again, it provides a much more human experience, but we're making sure that that recruiter is providing, and the design is providing the consistency with those flex where they're needed. And I wanted to share this example with you. So Synchrony is one of our long-standing clients, and they have created a process which is absolutely automated with the use of ATS and CRM technology. But what they do, even though many of the communications at this stage of the process during the attraction and through to application stages are absolutely automated, and you can see that by the emails that are generated through the system. Every one of those automated touch points provides the candidate, Marco in this case, with an opportunity to engage with the Synchrony brand. So you can see that they're receiving communications about news from the business, culture, employee stories. So throughout the process, even before he's got to the point of application where a recruiter might be in touch with him, he's had the opportunity to feel like he's really getting to know the personality and some of the people that work within that organization, making what is a very automated process very, very human. So just wanted to share that example with you as a great example of best in class when it comes to the front end of recruitment. Ben, you had some more thoughts on this topic.
I have thoughts on every topic, Kira. Come on now. So yes, one of the things that you talked about there that was so important is starting that connection and building on it. Right down that whole journey you just shared with us. You can see that starting to build up, just like any relationship you would have. So I was speaking with the head of talent for an organization recently, and one of their key strategies, they're high growth. They're like, listen, the speed at which we hire dictates the speed of the business. If we can't hire enough people, we're going to slow down. We're not going to be able to reach our goals. So we've got to have this really streamlined approach to that, very predictable approach to hiring. And one of the things that they did is when they started looking at their data, trying to figure out how they could adapt their process. And they said, you know what, we started investing in and building relationships with people. And sometimes we dismiss that when we open a new role. And so instead of doing that, they said, who knows us and who do we know? how do we start with those relationships and start planting the seeds of, and really grow that into a more fruitful potential candidate relationship we end up hiring and converting. And so they started looking at 3 different buckets of those. The people who are inside the business, who are looking for other roles, who are qualified, who are suitable. We already know them. There's a strong relationship there. How do we capitalize on that and move them to a role where they're a good fit? Referrals. This is someone who trusts us, who likes us, who's telling others about us. That's a good place to be. How do we make sure that we're using that source of trust that they're passing on to us, that relationship, and taking that to the next level? And the other piece were the silver medalists. I know that when I was a recruiter years ago, it was very manual and difficult process, but I had so many times had candidates that came out of someone who had been, in the top 2 and didn't get hired, ended up being a great candidate for a future role. And I learned very early on how important it was to keep in touch with those people and to keep that going, because you had spent this time already building a relationship with them, trying to get them excited about your company. They got down to the final level and you ended up picking someone else for some reason or another. But that didn't mean you discard them completely. You need to not discard that relationship. And so their big takeaway was looking at these 3 buckets, ended up allowing them to fill about 30% of their hires on an annual basis from people that they knew or that knew them. And that way they turn their attention to the other 70%, treating them more like a traditional candidate, open, post, source, all those kind of things. So that was the big push that we saw in that, and a great example of how you can start looking at and looking for relationships and using them to accelerate your hiring and improve your results as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important, in referring back to the Synchrony example, through the use of CRM technology that I mentioned, they've been able to do just this by maintaining relationships with those different talent pools, to the point where actually some of the content that they are producing through their talent communities is generating more applications than some of the outbound media spend. And they've been really able to drive down how much they're having to spend on targeting brand new candidates, unknown candidates known to them, because they are going and hiring the people that they've already got a relationship with. So there's massive amounts of benefits there.
Well, one of the things that reminds me of, we were hiring for a position years ago, and I didn't know, we had nobody in our database, we had nobody that we knew, and even our SMEs in the business didn't know someone personally. But I said, here's my little template, send this out, forward it out to your network, and let's see what happens. And a week later, we had someone call in, wanted a conversation about it. They were interested in the role. How'd you find out about us? And we went back through the email chain. It had been forwarded 7 times before it reached someone who was qualified for the role, who was interested, and who wanted to come work for us. And so those relationships, that trust, is not something to take lightly. If you build that, then it will extend and pay dividends long term, as you're sharing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of technology-enabled processes to really create connection, I think absolutely let's move on to onboarding, and Chris, jump in, because I think there's some really exciting topics to cover here.
Yeah, and what's interesting in the world of onboarding is often there is a lot of focus on the recruitment aspect and having that relationship and that experience. And then once that offer is accepted, many times there's a gap and there's nothing that is there. And I think when it comes to creating connections and creating a great onboarding experience, we really look at 3 key elements and 3 steps that I'll talk through to make sure that we don't just drop candidates off the face of the earth once they've accepted the offer, and how do we maintain that relationship and drive them into the onboarding process. And the first of those steps is get to know the person. Now, we took inspiration from some academic research that was done a few years ago from Professor Dan Cable out of the London Business School. Now, Dan worked with a large BPO who hired thousands of people a year, and they had a problem with understanding 6-month attrition of employees, but also employee productivity. And a lot of this was based in call centers where there could be high turnover for the nature of the job, but how could they try and improve that and actually get that productivity up? And so what this study looked at, it was looking at whether minor tweaks to the onboarding process that focused on the organization making an effort to get to know that new joiner a bit more and have more of an authentic connection could actually help to resolve these problems. So it was a really interesting study looking at, could being more connected and more interested in someone actually help with business outcomes. And on the next slide, we can see that the results were astonishing. What the study showed was that attrition in that group, which had more of the focus on the personal relationship, who they were as an individual, we saw attrition drop by 57% in that study. And also at the same time, that same group, customer satisfaction rose by 11 percentage points. So there were these really direct correlations between how you can change that experience a little bit to be more human and more focused on connection and the actual business output, which was really interesting. And I know, Ben, you've got an example as well on a similar angle about being more connected to individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a chance recently to meet a wonderful leader in the talent space, Junko Fukama, and we were talking about some of the approach that they take when someone's new to the business. So she said one of the hardest parts, we've talked this already, you've heard from Chris, you've heard from Kira, like that relationship starting off at the beginning is hard. When was the last time any of you walked out into a new area, new people? It's like, who wants to be a friend? Like, no, we don't do that. Okay. And it's hard to get to know new people. And so one of the things they started doing was what they called a me manual. And it's essentially a user guide for how to work with you. It's all those things that you know about the people you've worked with for 3, 4, 5 years, those little nuances of how they like to work or their weird little quirks that are kind of funny. Like those things you learn over time. And her whole idea was if we can shorten the time for that, it makes them feel like they belong, makes them feel like they're connected, makes them feel like they're in the right place where we really get them. So the way it works is when someone's brand new to the business as part of the bigger onboarding process, not a one-day process, as you heard from Chris already, but a longer-term process, they say, hey, we want you to answer some questions about you. How do you work best? What brings out your best creativity? How do you want to show up in a meeting? Do you want to be the one that speaks first? Do you like to sit back and reflect? So how do you like to do these things? Because once someone knows those about you and those things are open and shared with the team, they can approach you a different way. They can do it in a way that's more inclusive, it's more respectful, that's more understanding of the way that you work best. Because we all know the one thing that we know about humans is that they are completely unique and individual. They have different perspectives, priorities, preferences, all those things. And so it's hard to adapt to that when it's not written down. Why don't we just write it down instead? And so I think it's a great example, a great approach. I've seen other organizations do this as well. Had a chance to talk to the head of onboarding at Zapier years ago. That was one of the things they did as well. So it's just a really easy way to start that conversation. And one of the fun things for her, we're talking all about candidates and new hires today. But one of the fun things that Junko found is when she had this team that had been working together for a couple of years, they were sort of at loggerheads on an issue, could not agree on a direction. She said, okay, pause, everybody through their me manual. These are all people who had been there, so they've never done it before. And so she put them through this process. And as they're sharing, they're like, oh, I didn't know that about you. And even teams that were longer term had been established started finding new forms of connection, and they ended up getting around the problems they were facing. So it can build deeper connections, even for people who have one already, or for those who are brand new to the business.
And thanks for that, Ben, because that's really, I love that story. And it's one of the areas, even before I joined Onboarder, I was involved in running onboarding programs for other organizations and was very much interested in how can you try and get the information about new hires or people, but in the new hire process more specifically, and how do you then share that with others in a scalable way? And I think that was one of the draw cards for me that kind of brought me to Onboarder, was thinking about how do you leverage technology to help scale these types of efforts and help with the connection. And on the next slide, just briefly kind of talking about one of the features Onboarder has is this concept, which is very similar to what you were describing there, Ben, around how do you capture someone's genuine self and personality? Because so often organizations will have profiles. There are a profile for every system, but often the profile may be a headshot and a job title, or maybe even location if there's a couple of fields. And one of the things from an Onboarder perspective we were thinking about is how do you get to understand someone more? And so we have these cards, and you can see in this image, there's a concept of a cover image, which is meant to be where an employee will upload a photo of them doing something they love. And immediately that creates this interesting conversation starter, just looking at what that person is doing, but then also looking at things like hobbies and interests and communication styles. And so thinking about how can you leverage technology to help bring that connection to life, I think is something that obviously we're focused on today, and hopefully give some inspiration to others as well on the call. Moving on to the next step in the process. So the next step is thinking about how do you create that personalization for new joiners based on what you've learned from step one. So it's great to capture it, but if you do nothing with it, then it's probably going to be worse than if you didn't capture it at all. And so we've got some really good examples I wanted to share from what I've personally seen in working with Onboarded customers, and hopefully give some inspiration for some ideas you might try as well. And the first is the concept of what we call a 3 p.m. munchie or a 3 p.m. snack. And we all know when 3 p.m. hits, there's something that we all go to, whether it's sweet, savory. And so capturing that, we've seen a lot of our customers use that in the onboarding experience. So before a new joiner starts, asking, hey, what is it when 3 p.m. hits that you go for? And when that's captured, it's then passed on automatically to the manager or to a buddy in that journey. And it just says, hey, Kira loves X on, 3 p.m. snacks. And when that day arrives and it's day one or the first week, then that snack or that munchie can be delivered on the desk if it's in the office, or even just in a little pack if the employee is remote. And it's amazing how
It's anything with peanut butter, by the way, Chris, just for future reference.
Okay, noted. Look out for something with peanut butter arriving. We had a really good example actually in Australia, one of our customers there, where the new joiner put lamb chops as the 3 p.m. munchie, not quite the normal 3 p.m. munchie. And so the organization decided to actually run with it and ordered the lamb chops, and they actually had a event on site, very much talking around, hey, it was your 3 p.m. munchie, so we're going to actually do it. So it's amazing how that experience can then help with LinkedIn posts, employer brand, those types of things, but more importantly, helping with that individual feeling connected to the business. A few other examples. Another customer is looking at connection and learning. So how do you try and facilitate peer-to-peer learning within that onboarding experience? And they will ask the new joiners and others in the organization, what is their superpower? What do they know and like to teach others? And then they'll use the technology to connect people based on what people want to teach and what people want to learn. And it's a really interesting way to drive a genuine connection around something that they actually care about and will make an impact to them as well. And then a couple other examples, one which is quite a simple example, similar to the munchie, called the tea time or the coffee time. And during that onboarding process, again, asking the new joiner, what do you like? Do you like a tea? Do you like milk, sugar? Do you want a coffee, cappuccino, flat white? And asking that question again just gives something to the manager or to a team member. And so when that new joiner turns up on day one, and if it's on site, you're going out for a coffee in the first one-on-one, then the manager can order what they want. And it's really quite a nice experience just to show that that connection is there on quite a basic level, but it can really help build the foundations for that connection. And then the final one just for today is, I really love, one of our customers has this concept of the Top Connector Award. And they have, and I have as well, a belief that onboarding is a team sport. It's not just down to the HR team. It's not just down to the manager. It's about the team. And what they do is, using the Onboarder platform, 3 months after the new joiner has started, they put a question out and they say, who had the biggest impact on your onboarding experience and what did they do? And the new joiner will fill out the name of the person and they'll put some detail around what they did. And then each quarter, those responses are tallied and the organization picks the Onboarding Excellence Award winner and shouts out those individuals who have made the biggest impact on new joiners in the organization. And so it's quite nice because it really is allowing that new joiner to connect with others, but then also to reward and recognize those that are going above and beyond in the experience as well, which is really nice. So just a few examples I wanted to share that I found really inspiring and hopefully given some food for thought for everyone else as well. And then if we think on the how we can actually do this from a technology perspective. So it's one thing asking the questions, but what we do at Onboarder is we look at having this workflow builder that will automatically adjust the content based on a response that someone has given. And so then you're able to really, at scale, connect people based on similar skills, similar levels, and try and automate some of those fun processes so that they don't get lost and get missed in the shuffle as well. And then finally, the third step that we look at for effective onboarding is how do you make it easy for people to build connections? When we looked at the report that we ran, the employees who were in the survey told us that the onboarding activities for them that make making friends the easiest is, number one, organize social events, which makes sense. Meeting people face to face or even online is a nice way to meet people. The second was mentoring and buddy systems. So really thinking about, again, skills, how do you connect people based on what they want to learn or similar interests and hobbies. And then the final and the third thing that was mentioned was looking at bios and profiles. And that doesn't surprise us, what I've been talking about with what we at Onboarder have been looking at with these connection cards. But people just want to know more about others in the organization. And often they'll find it a bit difficult. And so it's a potential opportunity for organizations to improve those profiles just to make people feel like they can be more connected in the organization. And on the next slide, we look at the way that can be brought to life, and just a couple of examples here of what I and we would recommend. It's trying to think around how can you integrate your existing technologies to make them easy and a way that employees will be able to use technology that they're already using. And so in this example, I've got one example with Microsoft Teams. And for those organizations who use Teams, often it is the source of truth for everything. It's where you live and breathe at work. And so at Onboarder, we looked at, well, how can we leverage that platform to help people build connections? And so we looked at two areas. One was within a Teams channel where people can have a look at others in the organization. They can connect and start a chat. And then the other was actually during meetings and during a Teams call. And what we found was a lot of organizations say that they'll have workers who are remote, or they're in different teams, and they might be on these meetings in a project and they've never actually really connected with that individual. And they might hop on every week for once an hour. But what we've looked at is actually putting the cards within that Teams call. And it's been really interesting the way that organizations are leveraging that, where people feel like they know a bit more about someone, or they might even start the call and saying, I see that you're scuba diving. I'm actually a certified scuba diver. And then it just changes the potential outcome of that meeting as well, because it's much more personalized as you go through. And so
let's chat about the weather, I would imagine, in those calls.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's elevating the conversation a bit more. But It's true, because I think often you need a bit of a talking point to get started, and that's a nice personal way to do it from that side.
Yeah, sure.
So I think the thing here, the takeaway, is trying to use technology to help scale these different programs to build the connections, but also trying to make sure that those technologies are integrated and they're useful, and they're not just creating headaches and more drama than if you didn't have them at all, I'd say, from that side.
Fabulous. So it's question time, I think, and we've had a few questions come through. So I'm just going to have a look. So one of the questions, and Chris, I'll come to you because it directly relates, is does that mean onboarding is better for new hires if it's on site?
Oh, great question. I think it depends on the thinking behind the program design, essentially. So on-site, in an ideal world, we could all do on-site onboarding. It would be amazing. Everyone can be flown in, but we know that's not possible. And so I think when we think about remote onboarding, it's just getting creative with how you do it. So rather than potentially having the same agenda for your on-site and remote onboarding, thinking about staggering that out over a couple of weeks, for example. So I've seen some really good examples where if we think about induction sessions and information around the values and the culture in the organization, rather than doing it over a 2 or 3 day period on site, having every couple of days a nudge that goes out saying, here is a bit more information about the culture, here is a message from our managing director. And so you're able to convey a similar amount of information, but more bite-sized nudges, which means you don't lose people. And so it's, again, onboarding is more than just one day. So it's thinking about the program of work behind it and how you can make people feel included, how you can connect based on hobbies and interests and skills, while they mightn't be able to actually see each other face to face.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great answer. And I think we've had go on, Ben, jump in if you've got something to add.
Yeah, I was going to throw something in there to add to that. We think that on-site sometimes is like the cure to things, but I don't know about all of you, but I've been to the on-site first day and they're like, oh yeah, that was today. Welcome, like you're here. And they're like surprised that you actually showed up, and we'll find you a place to sit and we'll get you a computer next week. And so on-site doesn't cure all of that. It doesn't make that necessarily easier. It does have to be different, right? Don't try to make it the exact same, just copy it and put it online, because what someone will put up with in person, in a room with someone else physically, they won't put up with the same sorts of things you were saying, Chris. It can't be exactly a one-for-one copy, or it doesn't land right. It doesn't stick as well. We're not experiencing it the same way. So the things you're telling them and sharing with them may not stay up there where you want them to stay. So spreading it out is one thing that definitely aligns with a lot of the learning theory. One of the things that we see in the research around learning more broadly, because a big part of onboarding is learning about the new company and the new processes and everything else. One of the things we see in learning research is that someone who is hybrid or remote, they're twice as likely to say they have to do more learning on their own. So if you are helping them along that journey, you have resources there, make sure they know that, make sure that they're plugged into that. And as you were saying, nudge them, Chris, like make sure you're nudging them on those things too, so they never feel like they're out on an island by themselves, because that's the biggest risk of someone being virtual, is they feel untethered or unconnected from everything else that's happening. And you spend so much time trying to get them in the door, you don't want to lose them because they feel like they're not connected right off the bat.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think this one is connected, this question. So we have a question saying, Ben mentioned that companies are focusing more on compliance than on personalization in the onboarding process. Is there anything else that the panel can share about creating great experiences that might help us think about how we refine our processes? And I think if I just start on this one, we obviously mentioned about the personas when it came to recruitment, but I actually also think the personas are really helpful when thinking about onboarding as well. To Ben's point, a different process for in-person versus online, but also a different process for and different things that they want to learn about the company depending on the hiring type. So as you really think about your personas or your talent archetypes, and this doesn't have to be for every single role type you have, it can be for the ones where you've either got an attraction problem or you have a retention problem, because that's really important that you don't bring these people in and then you're losing them out the back door. Really think about what is it based on the persona that they care about, what are they going to want to know most about, and who are the types of people in your organization that they would benefit from being connected from. And I think if you start there, you can really think about making something that does feel more personalized, and tailor the content to those different audience groups. Chris, do you have any other thoughts that you'd want to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I think tailoring, personalizing is key. That's a really big thing, and using technology to help do that in certain ways. And then I think the other part is very much thinking around, what do people need and what are they asking for, versus what do we as an organization want to throw at them? Because so often, I'll say as the combined group, will create programs without potentially getting all the input of recent new joiners and what they've experienced and what they need or what they're lacking. So I think a lot of the time when I work with different companies, it's going in and understanding every 6 months, what's the feedback saying? What are we hearing? Where are the pain points? Who's doing, which employees are being the most productive? Is there anything we can see about what they did in their onboarding? Were there links between what their manager or their team was showing them? And so it's basically looking at constantly reviewing and evaluating, getting the learnings, and then enhancing and tweaking the processes rather than just kind of sticking with what we as the company think is the correct way to do it.
The voice of the candidate and the new hire is super critical in all of this, I'd say. Ben, have you got anything that you'd want to add on this topic?
As Chris was just saying that, I was picturing the weird proposal I mentioned earlier, like don't give them what you think they want, give them what they actually want. So yes, I'm coming back to that one. The other thing I'll say is there's a great book that was published a couple years ago called The Power of Moments, and it looks at how to create a great experience for someone. It's a phenomenal book. You're thinking about onboarding or thinking about recruiting, because when I read the book, I just translated experience to employee experience or candidate experience, and it works great. And they say, in the research, or when we're thinking about this, we think that the process needs to be perfectly level, like great experience across the board. And the truth is, none of us have unlimited budgets to create a perfect experience for every person at all points in stages. So what they say in the book, where the research shows that you can create peak moments where you connect with someone on some emotional level. Chris, you're talking about those moments in the onboarding process that really like wow people. We can create those moments, and those will overshadow the more dull, mundane parts where they've got to sign off on documents and things like that. But we have to intentionally create those. And Kira, that's what I got from you a minute ago when you were talking about personas and things. It's got to be very intentional. It can't be accidental or hopeful, like maybe that'll work out, but we have to plan for that in advance. The example that I would give is if you've ever been to like Disney World with the family or something like that, when you think back on that, you think about the smile on your child's face and the joy that they had. You don't think about the hour you stood in the sun roasting, standing in line for a terrible ride. You think of the good parts of it. And so your onboarding process can be the same. They're not going to think about, man, that was a great e-sign experience on that document. No, they had that 3 p.m. munchie, like Chris mentioned, and it really connected to me, and they paid attention to who I am. They listened. And so that's the thing I would encourage all of you on, is to really think about how to create that peak moment. And it comes back to being very intentional and careful about how you try to plan for that.
Absolutely. And I think by using technology, one of the things that we hear a lot is, well, an onboarding experience puts a lot of effort on the hiring manager to create a great experience. But actually, if you use technology, it takes a lot of the effort away from the hiring manager, and all they need to do is create those moments that matter, where there will be that connection or the wider team, because the rest of the process is automated. And I think that's super important as well, is invest the time in where, to Ben's point, where it's going to be the most impactful. One of the questions that we've had through as well is there a difference in preference by someone's age or generation, either in the hiring process or in the onboarding experience? I would say absolutely yes. Age and generation does make a difference, particularly when it comes to how people want to consume content. But also there's also a inclusivity in that, in people who need to consume information, digest information, receive information in different ways. So I think you need to really, within those personas, think about some of those factors. But to Ben's point, you're not going to be able to cater for all. As long as there is a support mechanism underneath what you're creating where people can ask for something different, then they feel supported. You don't have to cater for every single person in every single way, but they just need to know where to go to ask the question if they want to speak to somebody or receive the information in different ways. But yes, you will notice that that generations and people who need to interact with technologies in different ways or receive information in different ways will have different requirements, and that's fine as long as we're understanding those and catering for them. But it doesn't have to be perfect, to Ben's point. Anything that either of you would want to add to that?
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, agree, first of all.
Yeah.
And even little things around what a lot of our onboarded customers will do is they will ask, how do you want to be communicated? Do you want an SMS? Do you want an email? Do you want a WhatsApp? Do you want Microsoft Teams? So thinking about the channel, it sounds like a very basic thing, But to what you're saying there, Kira, that can even make a difference. Do I want one versus the other? And then even, I know it wasn't quite the question, but thinking about language preferences too, having options, people to engage with content in their native language. We actually see a lot of research and findings into that, which shows both generational, but also language types. If you try and create opportunities to personalize the content on those ways, you'll definitely see higher engagement.
Absolutely.
I found
Chris,
for a
while I'm with
fact,
you.
Chris.
Sorry, I had a whole new question for Chris, if that's all right, Ben, which is
Go
around
for it. Go for it.
how do you train the onboarding buddy to make sure that they're successful?
So my approach, and I guess Onboarder's approach, is it's kind of in the moment mentoring. Make it simple, coach them and guide them through it. There's two ways I've seen this done. Some organizations will create formal buddy programs where they will select a group of people and they'll run training sessions and get them up to speed. And it's a pool of people to select from, which works really well. And there's a whole training piece behind it. But the other is, if that's not possible as an organization, then it's looking at, again, how to use technology to try and give people the right information, some tips and tricks, and not trying to make it feel like it's bigger than Ben-Hur and it's this big thing. Actually, you're there to help with this, this, and this, and your manager will be the one doing this, this, and this. So why don't you send them a message now and lock in some time to connect with them? And then perhaps it's, again, the drip feeding and the nudging. Oh, they've been here a week. Why don't you do this, this, and this? And so getting those nudges at different moments is really effective, and it doesn't need a whole training program behind it, which I think a lot of organizations think it does, but I've seen that work really well, just in the moment coaching.
I think that's a great idea, and a question that's come through for me is how do you connect recruiters and trainers to the organizational purpose so that they can connect candidates and new employees to that purpose and not just the kind of job task at hand? I think everyone's heard of EVP, and we've been talking for many years about EVPs. I think with the technology that's now available to us, we almost need to move beyond that, where we're creating really accessible and usable toolkits for people like recruiters, hiring managers, trainers, where it's not about a strategic, this is our EVP and these are our pillars and this is our purpose, but actually giving them content and messaging that they can bring right down to 2 foot above the ground to really make it make sense for that particular candidate or for that new hire. And technology really enables us to do that at scale now, so that it can almost be self-service in a way. There's a whole other webinar in this that I think we need to explore one day, but really making sure that we're not just talking about organizational purpose or creating these human connections in a way that's in any way strategic. We need to create really practical tools and let technology allow us to do that in a way that anyone who's picking this up can really translate it and make it make sense, whether that's direct to the candidate or the new hire or through the lens of a recruiter or a hiring manager or a trainer. I think that would be my take on it. We are quickly running out of time. There are some other questions that we've not managed to get to today. So we will absolutely look at those. We'll get them together and we'll get our responses and make sure we share this out. But in the final 2 minutes, let's cover our final thoughts. So I'm going to come first to you, Ben, for your final thought.
I'll be very quick. Relationships and connections are built on trust, and that's built on authenticity and transparency. So if you're trying to figure out how do we build trust, how do we get to that relationship, it comes from being open, authentic with your candidates, with your new hires, and being as transparent as you can, and you'll build a foundation that you can build a true relationship on that will stand the test of time.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I've skipped forward. And Chris, what's your final thought?
Yeah, a lot of discussion about automation and human connection. So I think balancing automation with connection is not an easy task. So it's really not easy, but it's really important to listen to your people, understand areas that you might need to focus on bringing connection more into the experience. And then if you can really strike that balance between efficiency and experience, that's the true sweet spot for your team.
My final thought is absolutely use the technology, but leverage your recruiters in the hiring process to create that human touch, and leverage the real stories of your real employees through your communications, both in the recruitment and onboarding process, in order to really make your company real and humanize it. And I think that is absolutely powerful. So just as we wrap up, if anyone would like to experience Onboarder today, then QR code here, a big fat QR code for you to scan and have a look at the system. And you know, as Chris described, there's some really great technology that can really help automate some of these processes and create those human connections. And if anyone would like to speak to myself directly about AMS Employer Brand Advisory and how we can help in telling some of these stories and creating some of the content, whether that be in the recruitment onboarding space or beyond, then my email address is on the screen and you can absolutely reach out to me directly, and I would love to hear from you. So it just leaves us an opportunity to say a big thank you. You can connect with all three of us via the QR codes on the screen and learn a little bit more about us and some of our connections with some of the information that we provided about ourselves today. Huge thank you to you, Ben, and huge thank you to you, Chris, for all of your time and thoughts. And we look forward to hearing from everyone who's joined the call and keeping the conversation going. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kira. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.